Storytelling and the family business, a topic that you and I both are very passionate about. And ever since we've known each other, I think we've talked about the importance of storytelling in conjunction with the family business from our respective perspectives of what we do professionally. But I do think that, passion for storytelling is something that is probably linked to a behavior that we know from our own childhood or that we know from our own lives. So our first question to you, Guillermo, today is if you remember when you consciously realized what kind of a role storytelling plays in your own life, and if you remember what kind of stories sort of like changed your life when you were a child.
I think that all childhood is related with the stories that your family members tell you on how and when and where your parents met in the history of your life. So I think that this is one of the most intriguing questions for a human being once you have conscience of yourself. Where do I come from? Why do I was born? How was that my parents meet each other? So this is the great story that you always want to know. And every time that you listen to that story, you try to figure out, it's like the movie Back to the Future. I mean, you try to figure out how was it, how was my father, how was my mother, and why do they do that, and things like that. And that's very important, because I think that this is, in the bottom of your heart, this is the answer that you want to know. Why do I am here? Why do I exist? So I think that this is the most important story that you ever listen.
I love what you're saying here, because in a way, it's what you're saying is that one of the most important stories that we'll hear as a child is actually our origin story. So even there, we're trying to figure out already where we come from. And I love that. I love that notion. And I think that it applies very well to our discussion of family businesses, because as we know, storytelling in the family business is extremely important to maintain a sense of identity, to make sure that, we know where we came from and accordingly try to figure out where we're going. But you actually found a way to very proactively use storytelling in your work with families in order to trigger possible transformation, in order to open conversations around change. Can you tell us a little bit more about exactly when you started doing that and how you realized that this was actually a very effective way to start a transformational journey for a family business?
Yes. Well, I've been doing consultancy for 20 years. And every time that I start every process of helping families to professionalize their whatever they need, the governance, the decision-making processes, there was always a search for the values that basically guide them on the decision-making process. So the only way I knew to collect the values of the family was through the history. And every time that we start looking for the basis of what they really need to validate the decision-making process, we have to go back to the history and understand where those values come from. So the methodology I start to work with family was based on the storytelling. We create a concept of the chronogram, which is a base of storytelling, starting once the family identify what's the origin of the family. And basically it's 2 or 3 or 4 generations back. So all of the information, all of the characters of the plot that we start to draw, they are part of a journey that this entity, the family, has started a long time ago. But there is a certain part of the history where appears a mythical character, which is the hero. And most of the family business I've been working with can trace the moment when some special one that we could call the entrepreneur, the founder of the heritage, of the values, of the legacy, of the wealth of the family, he started his own journey. And the interesting part is that every time that I repeat that exercise, I found that there were certain things that start to repeat. There was a certain pattern on the history. And this pattern is the hero's journey, and it's based in this concept.
Does everyone have the opportunity to have their own hero's journey?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Everybody can be a hero. That's the most important lesson.
In terms of going back with a family that doesn't have access anymore to, the original founder, the founder's deceased, and but has little information about what actually happened. What do you do in those cases? Like, do you allow interpretation to a certain extent that can be healing, or what happens?
That's absolutely what happens.
Mm.
Exactly. Remember that we are not talking about a person, we are talking about a myth.
Mm-hmm.
Those are different things. First, you have the person that, because of his actions, the system created a myth.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the way that the system hold together around the myth. So the information that you will have is the information that the system shared. And every generation can recreate that information in the way that it better serves to them. So yes, you can recreate the life of the character, but it always will be around the myth. And the interpretation that you will have to that information will depend on the generation decision on what to do with that.
So we live in a time right now where you could argue that there have never been more tools or more channels there to tell stories, but you could also argue that, time where people would sit together without distraction has probably been reduced. Like times where like that kind of a space is being created is less. It's not exactly like we have a very regular around the campfire kind of a scenario anymore for most people, without there being a lot of noise and distraction coming in through devices, etc. Now, positive or negative, you can see it as you like, but there's obviously now big differences in what kind of storytelling appeals to different generations. What's been your observation in terms of, how storytelling also needs to be adapted to a next generation, or to even like, the older generation, as pertains to trying to transform the family business?
Yeah, I will say that this current time of technology is something that it's in some way, as you said, helping and not helping on the way that we can gather around the fire and recreate the ancestral ritual of
Mhm.
storytelling, which is something that was the first of the revolutions of the Homo sapiens,
Mhm.
the conscious revolution, and it was all around the campfire. We have to work hard nowadays as leaders of the process of transformations in family business to recreate this situation. We don't fire nothing in the meeting room, but
Mm.
what we try to do is to gather together all the generations and all the members that we can, and try to create the mood to go in a humble way to share your thoughts and your feelings, and that's okay. We really struggle with that moment to happen, and this is the most important part of the whole process, I have to tell you. But yes, digital technologies are the most useful alive in storytelling. Once you can have this gathering recreated, then you have a lot of information that you have to
Mm.
deliver, and that's the point when I think that doing interviews, doing podcasts and videos with all the characters of the plot that we've been telling will reinforce most of the information that the members of the family need to get.
In this particular moment in time that we are living with, the global pandemic and its consequences, how do you think can this tool, or this way of looking, I guess, at the story of the family business, how can it help us in facing this degree of uncertainty? Like, how can it help us move forward into potentially a reality that even the hero
Hmm,
has never faced
absolutely.
when building the legacy that we carry?
Absolutely. Okay, so you have the question of the interview. So yes, how it can help? It can help us, first of all, reinforcing the identity of the group, the belongingness, the anima of the group. This is the first one. The second one, it gives you hope. Because when you know that in your DNA there is the myth of someone who could find answers to the test that he was facing, you know that I am that kind of guy. I have that kind of blood in my veins. And the third one is that certainly there is no way to imagine the future if you don't know your past.